Okay, good morning, everybody. Shalom Aleichem. Good Chodesh. It is Rosh Chodesh Nisan this morning, and we should appreciate that it's Chodesh Nisan, Chodesh HaGeula. The Haggadah says, Yachal mi be'od yom. I would have thought that we should have, Yachal me Rosh Chodesh, sorry. Yachal me Rosh Chodesh. I would have thought that we should have began Pesach today. And I think we could all appreciate that, because if we're preparing for literally a month for Pesach, just for 8 days, just for 7 days, at max 8 days, come on, make it a 22-day holiday. So the initial thought of the rabbis was that it should be Yachol Me Rosh Chodesh, that today is the day we should have began the holiday of Passover. Thankfully for all of us, we have 2 more weeks to prepare, but already you feel that sense of redemption, that sense of geula. You could smell it. It's no tachanun, like you feel a little bit of a yontif already, and it's very, very special. And it's chus that we have this Shabbos, is that we are beginning the 3rd book in the Torah, a fresh start, which Parshas Vayikra. And the Torah says, Vayikra el Moshe, Vayidaber Hashem Elaf. God calls out to Moshe, and he says to Moshe, May Ohel Moed Limor, from Ohel Moed. Says Rashi, Vayikra el Moshe, L'chol Dibros u'L'chol Amiros u'L'chol Tzivuyim Kadma Kriya Lashon Chiba. All the speeches and discussions and commandments that God gave Moshe, he begins it with the word Kriya, Vayikra, Lashon Shamalache Ashares Mishtamshim Bo. It is a language that the malachim use, as we say every single day, Vikara ze el zev yamar, kadosh, kadosh, kadosh. Aval umos ha'olam, when God speaks to the umos ha'olam, to the prophets of the Gentile world, he uses the language vayikar, which means like happenstance or carry, a language of tumah, impurity. Rav Gamaliel Rabinovich writes here in the Sefer something very, very beautiful, that the language of Vayikra is a lashon of chiba, a lashon of love or endearment, of sweetness. And you would think that, this is necessary to pull in a simple Jew who feels disconnected from God, who doesn't really know Hashem, and the way that Hashem pulls them in is through a lashon chiba. Moshe Rabbeinu, peh al peh, daber bo, somebody that God spoke to face to face. They've been through so much together. Hashem really needs to speak to them, the lashon chiba. Yeah, and he says that's exactly it. V'netzrichim lilmod mizeh. Shema Kadosh Baruch Hu Amar Asher Malami Torah Lama Yisrael. No, Cain i Moshe Rabbeinu. Hashem is a Malami Torah Lama Yisrael. He acted this way to Moshe Rabbeinu, that he spoke to him with a endearing language and a positive speech in the way that he spoke and taught Torah to Moshe Rabbeinu, all the more so with every other person in Klal Yisrael. Lachein im lomdim im talmidim o im abanim. If you're learning with your students or with your children or with your grandchildren, it needs to be done in the context of positivity. It needs to be done in the context of love, endearment, a lashon of chiba. And that's how Vayikra begins to teach us this very, very important lesson. And he says, unfortunately, too often, the kids are given got to do this. And it's done in a very, very rash and harsh way. And when the Torah is done that way, it may be effective immediately. If you think about it, when one educates their child and wants their child to do something, so if they yell at them or they speak to them harshly, they may listen to the parents and do it, but it doesn't necessarily make a long-term impact. But when they take the time to explain why this is important to them, and while they may not listen immediately, in the long term, the message is felt and is understood. It's done in a different way. So when it comes to teaching our children Torah, when it comes to an approach to Torah in general, we need to ensure that it's done in this positive way. And then he says something so beautiful. The first three words are Vayikra el Moshe. They begin, these three words, with the letters Vav, Aleph, Mem. What is Vav, Aleph, Mem? If you flip it around, it is Imo, my mother, right? Imo, your mother. He says, Ma kesher bein Vayikra el Moshe le'ima. What is the connection between Mami and Vayikra el Moshe? Elafi masha arachnu be'inyan akriya shel chiba miyesh inyan kan tosefas shegam imi mohu strichos litrom chalkan be'inyan zeh. The mother plays a pivotal role in educating their child in such a way. Shema b'ni musar avicha, Mishlei begins, v'al titosh Torah imecha. The father is usually associated with musar. It's usually a little harsher, but it's the mother that has the context and has the culture and creates the culture in the home itself, that it's Torah imecha, that is done with a language of chiba and a language of love. And that is Vayikra Moshe. If Hashem teaches Moshe in such a way, all the more so in the way that we are educating and teaching at all of our people, it should be done within the same vein. Especially we have Pesach coming up right around the corner, as you just mentioned, and you have to think about your Seder and what you want your Seder to be like. It's invariable, it's going to happen, it's inevitable that someone's going to spill something at your Pesach Seder, or somebody's going to not want to sit the entire time. What is our behavior, attitude towards those children or those individuals, even those adults that literally can't sit the entire time, need to walk around? It's a long time. The Seder itself should be a way of an amira of love, positivity, chiba around the Seder. It doesn't mean everything goes. There need to be boundaries and expectations, but at the same time, it's all in the context of positivity and love. That Rabbi, is the idea here from Vayikra Moshe. Yes.
So they both have both words have the same numeric value.
Which ones?
Imo and Vayikra. If you do the numbers, right? Imo is what, 41, 47, 47 is 11. And Vayikra is, I think, 317, which is also 11.
317. It is 317. Yeah. Oh, wow.
Both 11.
Both 11. Okay. Mendy is a Hasidic Rebbe. Baruch Hashem. It's beautiful. That's very beautiful.
Thank you.
Because it's a different type of gematria. What Mendy's working with now is not the classic gematria, 371, but then adding up the letters itself. Very, very beautiful. Okay. Daber al b'nei Yisrael. We're just going in order of the psukim right now. Daber al b'nei Yisrael. Speak to the Jewish people. Ve'amarta aleihem. And speak to them. Adam ki yakriv mikem korban lashem. An Adam that brings a korban for Hashem should bring it from mina behema, mina bakar, umin hatzon, takrivu es korbanchem. So this is a framework really of all the korbanos that we are going to bring, and we're going to be commanded to bring. Vayikra really is Torah's Kohanim, responsibilities that are done and relegated towards the Mishkan and the Beis HaMikdash. And a majority of the beginning parshios talks about the korbanos, which played a real central role in Jewish life and living in the times of the temple, just like we're so far away from that. But and here we begin with explaining the korbanos. And this pasuk, where Moshe Sternbach, Shlita, in his Sefer Tabadas, points out here, there's an inconsistency in the beginning of the pasuk to the end. Adam ki yakriv, a man who brings a korban to Hashem. Good. From the behema, the bakar, the tzon, excellent. Takrivu es korbachem. The pasuk begins in the singular, and ends in the plural. Ki yakriv mikem, singular. Takrivu es korbanchem, in the plural. Now, why is that? And he says the following. Kish adam chote, when somebody makes a mistake, when somebody sins, they think, what's the big deal? I'm doing it on my own. Leave me alone. Doesn't really matter what I am doing. Who cares? But really, each and every one of us affects the tzibur, right? Each of what we do affects everybody else. Right? So here, it's the sin that impacts not just the person, but everybody else. But additionally, when one returns to God, korban comes to the language of kriva, of coming close, then it's not only them that comes close, but the other people as well around them, right? I would say this manifests itself on a physical level, right? But also on a metaphysical level, when you decide to come close to Hashem, so other people also, it affects other people as well. And that is what the pasuk is teaching us, the impact that the yachid, the individual, has on the rabbim, on everybody else. There were studies that were done probably a decade or two ago about the impact of litter on a community. And the more that you find litter outside, the more that people don't care about how their streets and their parks look. So I think they did a study. There was a study that was done, and they littered an entire park, and they noticed that this is part of the study, that people would then wouldn't even take the 10 seconds to throw something in the garbage. He said, if it's already dirty, doesn't matter, right? My actions don't matter. And when parks, and that actually in some counties and cities, there was a direct correlation between litter and crime. And certain scientists would go around from city to city in America to look at this. But when they were able to clean it up, and everything was pristine, then you don't want to be that one person sullying the perfect, clean park. When you go to supermarkets, right, and everyone's going to be in supermarkets over the next few weeks, most likely. There's no Instacart Pesach version. Well, there probably should be. You'll notice, like, oh wow, this is really clean. It's like, it doesn't have to be perfect, but when it is, you feel a little bit different about it. It shows the impact that one person or the society can have on the individual when things get really out of hand. And he says that the pasuk in Shiur, right, or in Tehillim, writes, "Seh Pizura Yisrael." A seh, that the Jewish people are compared to a seh, a lamb, right? Why is that? Because if you have a whole group and you have a shepherd shepherding all of the sheep and all the lambs, and one of them falls out of line, why is it so important you don't lose one? Because when one goes off, usually others will follow that one and run away from the flock as well. That's why it's so important, besides the monetary importance of just one, but it's so important because you need each one because they follow each other. When somebody does something wrong, it doesn't just affect them, but it really has ramifications for everybody else in Klal Yisrael. That is thought number two. Adam ki yakriv mikem, it begins in Yachid and it's in Rabim. It shows the impact that we can have in the positive or in the negative. The first idea we mentioned is Vayikra Moshe, that Hashem spoke to Moshe in a very positive, endearing, loving way. And if God needed to teach Moshe Torah that way, and the Torah that we share with other people should also be expressed in such a way. The Ksav Sofer, Adam ki yakriv mikem. right? We're now leaving this pasuk for a little bit. Adam, that's funny. Usually, what would the Torah say? Not Adam, but Ish ki yakri mikem. When the Torah says Ish, it refers to man and woman. Why Adam? It's a funny word. Rashi tells us, Lama nemar Adam, ma Adam harishon lo hikriv min hagezel shahakol hayashalo af atem lo takrivim min hagezel. It comes to teach you that just like Adam harishon, what did he do? He brought a korban from things that belonged to him. So too, right? So too, you shouldn't bring korbanos from things that don't belong to you. The truth is, it's learned out from the word mikem. It has to be mikem. It has to belong to you. You have to own it. Similar to like a lulav, right? Well, any mitzvah you can't really steal. And if you steal it, you maybe can't perform the mitzvah. That's called mitzvah haba min aveira. You can't perform a mitzvah by doing an aveira. Some mitzvahs count anyway. For example, if one blew a shofar that was stolen, you get the mitzvah. The reason is because you can't steal the kol, right? The voice, the sound that comes out of the shofar is what you're going to do the mitzvah with, and that would be okay, right? That would be okay. So now the Ksav Sofer says maybe there's a different thing going on here. What is a deeper connection here between Adam Harishon and korbanos? And he says the following. So often, when somebody is seduced into doing an avera, when somebody so much, messes up, makes a mistake, the immediate gut reaction that they have is to blame somebody else. Right? What did Adam do? Hashem came to him and said, it was Chava's fault. Right, Shiur? I saw that with your, I can read lips. It was Chava's fault. It wasn't, right? It's not me. It's blame my wife. It was hers. It wasn't me. Shaul HaMelech, when he messed up with Agag, he blamed the people. It wasn't my fault. It was the people's fault, right? And so often, right? Who spilled, the milk? Who took the last cookie? She told me to do it. And we have to fight that. It's very instinctive as human beings that we don't want to accept ownership for our own misgivings, our own mistakes. We don't want to. It's reality. And so often we want to blame other people or other things, and we want to have excuses, right? I think it's good to have excuses, because then we can live a blame-free life. Adam ki yakriv mikem, he says that we need to learn from Adam to own up to our mistakes. We can't live life giving excuses. It's my parents' fault, that's the way they raised me. It's my teacher's fault, they never taught me this. At a certain point, we grow up and we need to take responsibility for everything that we do. And that's the Ksav Sofer here. Adam ki yakriv mikem, using the language of Adam Harishon purposefully to show us that we can't blame others. We need to accept responsibility. In fact, the Sforno writes in Parashat Bereshis that exactly what went wrong here. The Sforno writes that if Adam wouldn't have blamed Chava for his mistake, then things would have been different. Perhaps, owning up to it immediately, right, would have changed things. If you look back, and someone one day is going to write a PhD on this, probably, on political scandals. Or, I'm a sports fan. So if you look at the steroid scandal that rocked the 90s, early 2000s in baseball, and you catch people doing wrong things. Again, in politics, it's very much more licentious and heavier and very, very significant. It's sports, it happens in sports. Okay, it's a different story. I'm not comparing the two things that people make mistakes. The bottom line is both are wrong. So now when it comes to that, what are people like? Do people accept those individuals back into the tzibur, into the community? Generally, those individuals that are able to own their mistake and say, I messed up, right? It doesn't excuse them, and we don't know what happens behind closed doors with their own families. But klape the tzibur, there's an acceptance that there's a respect there that we don't accept what they did. We don't accept the sin, but we can respect them for owning up to their mistake. And there's like there's sometimes there's like a communal like tshuva or a cathartic way of accepting some leaders back into the fold for just that reason. Okay.
Rabbi.
Yes.
I think man has this thought in his head that he's perfect. And that's what always gets him into trouble, because a malach might be perfect, but man always makes mistakes. And if you always keep that in mind, that you are not perfect, then I think it's a lot easier to sometimes admit that I did something wrong.
So you're saying, right, we
have a problem to ourselves. We think we're this perfect being. Everything that we do is so perfect, but we're not. We're flawed. And if you know that and you can admit to that, then I think it's a lot easier to own up to things, because we do make mistakes. Hopefully not very often. We could try to minimize it, but we're going to make mistakes. And when we do, we need to own up to it. I hear you. Nobody thinks they're an extremist. You know what I mean? Everyone thinks that they are like the middle of the road Jew, the hashkafa. They're not, and we like to convince ourselves of that. It requires a lot of intellectual honesty to get out of that zone and think about ourselves objectively, which is very, very difficult. The Torah does expect us to do that, especially when invariably we're going to make mistakes. Yeah, Shira?
So when you were talking about how the Ksav Sofer talks about, the kesher with Adam, that we have to take responsibility for our actions and everything, and admit when we're wrong, makes me think about, before the Yamim Noraim, the Rabbanim talk about the steps of tshuva, the Markivei tshuva, and the very first one is vidui. You can't do any tshuva unless you're going to take ownership for the wrong that you have done. Because if you don't sincerely do that, then you can't have charata, and you can't try to undo it and all that. And so that's kashur to the whole thing about owning any mistake that we do.
That's great. Yeah, vidoy is the first step in the process of tshuva. You have to own it. You got to own it. You got to take achrayus. Yeah, it's excellent. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to Perek Hey, Pasuk Yud Aleph. We are learning about the korbanos, making mistakes. And says the Torah, if somebody cannot afford the regular korban is expected over here, and they can't pay for 2 turtle doves or 2 young doves, then what should they do? They should bring their korbano asher chata. Their korban chatas should be brought from asiris ha'efa.
Thank you so much. I have to come because I'm listening to Shomer Torah.
It should be brought me'asiras ha'efa, solas lachatas, lo yasim ala shemen, lo yiten ala lavona ki chatasu. Right, the korban chatas, again, everybody makes mistakes. In that vein, everybody makes mistakes. So, right, of all socioeconomic levels, people make mistakes. So we're not going to demand that somebody that is can't afford it is going to bring a korban that's out of their price range. So what do? That the individual, right, there's a few different levels. The last level is that this impoverished individual brings asiris ha'efa. They bring 1/10 of ephah fine flour for a sin offering. No oil or other spice they're put on it, right? Why is that? No oil or spices put on it? Because we don't want to make our korbanos fancy, our korban chatas.
for a sin. We're not going to make it fancy and spice it up because that is too much for the korban itself. It's not appropriate for the korban itself. But there's one other time in the Torah that the words asiris ha'efa, that we use a tenth of flour in something. So the Chidushei Harim makes this great point. Asiris ha'efa hu ha'isaron de kedusha. Ze ein b'shum korban shu basar kamoshahu. There's no other korban that requires asiris ha'efa except over here. And he says, why is that? The Torah tells us in Parshas Beshalach that the Omer, the man that we brought, which was an amount of an Omer, was an asiris ha'efa. It's, if you want to look it up, it's Perek Tes Vav, Tes Zayin, Pasuk Lamed Vav. Says this explicitly. Shouldn't pull it up. But Omer asiris ha'efa hu. That's it. End of Perek Tes Zayin. That the amount of man that we got every single day weighed asiris ha'efa, was a tenth of an ephah. So now here in the Korban Ani, for somebody that is sinning, they bring asiris ha'efa. Now, why is that so significant? So says the Chidushei Harim, that you see from there is that what is the amount of food that somebody eats over the course of the entire day? The man, that amount was how much the man weighed that someone took in for the entire day's portion, was asiris ha'efa. So this ani, what is he required to bring? The amount of food for the entire day. Maybe he loses one day of food. And that's the korban that he's bringing. And he says, this is a very holy thing. We think, oh, he can't afford it, so we give him a cheaper thing. But this is all relative to where we are. So the Torah tells us, this means that the poor person is offering his entire day's worth of food for him. And this, he says, the greater act of Mesiras Nefesh than the person of means who offers meat. Person of means that offers any meat, okay, he can afford it. It was extra. It was extraneous to his basic needs and necessities. For him, this is mamish taking off from his plate. The Mishnah tells us, and Rashi quotes us, Echad amarba v'echad amamet, one who gives a little bit, one who gives a lot. The most important thing is that what we are doing towards heaven, our intent, our kavanah with what we are doing. And here we see this very, very clearly. Although on the outside, the karbanos look very different. They're scaled based on the individual. But for this person, this is so significant and so important that we are machshiv this korban for this ani. Okay, that was thought number 4 for today. And the 5th idea for this morning comes from the korban asham. So what is a korban asham? When does the korban asham brought? A korban asham is brought, well, here, there's actually 5 different ashamos. But here, the asham is brought in the case of doubt. If somebody's not sure whether they ate treif, chelev, inappropriate fats, or not, so the Torah says they have to bring a korban asham. If they knew for sure that they ate these forbidden fats, they bring a korban chatas. So if they know for sure, chatas. If they don't know what they were eating, because they didn't know, they weren't sure, then they bring a korban asham. Which korban is more severe, is more strict? The korban asham is a more expensive and is a stricter korban, is more chamor korban than this. And you can argue, why would that be? One is a safek and one's a vadai. I for sure violated an aveira. I maybe violated an aveira. So says Rav Sternbach, that's exactly the point. Exactly the point. Asham Lashem, this person is guilty. If one is not paying attention to what is right in front of them, that is so significant, right? Gotta pay attention. That you need kapara for too, right? So that's the way Rav Sternbach says this, and he writes the following. He quotes the Ramah. The Ramah in Hilchos Tshuva, believe it or not, in Hilchos Yom Kippurim, in the Orach Chaim, the Ramah quotes Rabbeinu Yonah and discusses some aspects of Tshuva. And he says that when it comes to doing Tshuva for a Aveira that you weren't sure whether you violated or not, that is much harder to do Tshuva for than if you sure know. And it goes back to the point that we just mentioned a second ago, because we like to make excuses for ourselves. So if I'm not sure that I actually violated that Aveira, then come on, what's the big deal? It doesn't matter. Most likely, I always eat kosher. It's fine. It's a big. No. That therefore requires, the Torah is telling you, stressing this matter, that is more significant, because those things we easily push away. We make excuses for ourselves in those areas, and that is so important. This is right an insight into all people that want to change, right? That we have to really investigate ourselves and look into ourselves and understand that Safek Aveira is Yoser Chamor Me Aveira Atzmo, either for the reason of we're just not paying attention to what's going on in our life. We're just like so busy with everything else and we don't realize when we violate, or because we give ourselves and we talk ourselves into it that we didn't make the mistakes ourselves. We should have the presence of mind, right? Sternbach says, and we should be able to focus on all the food that comes into our mouth, but to notice what we are doing and how we are acting. Right? Next few weeks are going to be so busy that we feel like we're out of control, we're out of our minds. You have to have the presence of mind each and every day to be there and present, those around us. Just to review for today, 5 ideas. Vayikra Moshe Lashon Chiba. And when it comes to Torah Judaism, how we share the Torah and the Masorah should be done in a positive way, in a loving and endearing method. Adam ki yakriv mikem korban lashem. Mikem, we learn from Adam that we can't blame others for our mistakes. And then the pasuk ends takrivu as korbanchem in plural, showing the impact that our actions have, not just on ourselves, on people around us, physically, metaphysically. 4th idea, our Siras Ha'efa is the korban ani. For the ani, that was tremendous. That was a huge Mesiras Nefesh, because they just brought a Siras Ha'efa, which was the amount of food that they ate for the entire day. And last idea was Safek Aveira is more chamor than Aveira Atzmo. The korban asham is more chamor than the korban chatas. I wish everybody a wonderful, wonderful day.